It was a calm morning at the city park. The sun was soft and the sound of laughter filled the air. Officer Mark walked slowly down the path, holding the leash of his partner, a German shepherd named Rex. Mark had been with Rex for almost 5 years, and in that time they had become more than just a police team. They were family. Rex had saved lives, tracked lost children, and even found missing people during storms. But on this day, neither of them knew that something unexpected was waiting. The park was a favorite place for local families. Children played on the swings and slides. Parents sat on benches talking, and joggers passed by with smiles and music in their ears. It was a peaceful morning, the kind where nothing bad ever seemed possible. Near the playground, a little girl named Emily was building a small sandcastle with her mother, Sarah. Emily had bright brown eyes, a little pink hat, and a laugh that could make anyone smile. She was around 6 years old and full of energy. She loved dogs, and every time she saw Rex, she would wave and shout, "Hi, Mr. Rex." Rex loved Emily too. Whenever they came for patrols, he wagged his tail the moment he saw her. He was a gentle dog, calm and friendly, and children adored him. Sarah always thanked Officer Mark for letting Emily pet him. "He's such a good boy," she said often. "He makes everyone feel safe." And she was right. Rex had that kind of presence. As they walked around the park, Mark looked at the people around him and smiled. It was days like these that reminded him why he joined the force: to protect, to serve, and to make sure everyone could enjoy simple, peaceful mornings. But then Rex's behavior suddenly changed. His ears stood straight, his tail froze, and his nose twitched as if he had caught an unfamiliar scent. He stopped walking and stared across the playground. Mark followed his gaze and noticed a man standing near the fence at the far side of the park. The man wore a dark gray jacket and jeans. He had a cap pulled low over his eyes and kept pretending to look at his phone. At first, Mark thought nothing of it. Parks always had strangers passing by. But there was something unusual. The man wasn't watching his phone. His eyes kept shifting toward the playground, and every few seconds he looked directly at Emily. Rex let out a low growl, so soft that only Mark could hear it. It wasn't a playful growl or a sound of curiosity. It was a warning. Mark glanced at his partner and said quietly, "Easy, boy. What do you see?" Rex's eyes didn't move. He stood firm, every muscle in his body alert. Officer Mark had seen this behavior before, during a rescue mission years ago, when Rex had sensed danger long before anyone else. Back then, his instincts had led them to a trapped child in a collapsed building. Mark had learned one thing since then. When Rex sensed something, he was almost always right. The man leaned against the fence now, pretending to make a call. But his attention never left the little girl. He looked nervous, restless. He took a small step closer, just enough to shorten the distance between him and the playground. Rex's growl deepened and his tail began to flick slowly from side to side. Mark's hand tightened on the leash. "Okay, partner," Mark whispered. "Let's stay calm but keep an eye." He watched as the man pulled something out of his pocket. Maybe a phone, maybe not. He couldn't see clearly from where he stood. The park was still cheerful. No one else seemed to notice. Emily laughed as she ran toward the swing, her mother following behind. Rex's bark burst out suddenly, loud and sharp, breaking the calm like a crack of thunder. Everyone turned. Children stopped playing. The mothers froze. Rex barked again, louder this time, his body tense, his eyes fixed on the man. Officer Mark's instincts told him to trust his dog. He had never seen Rex act this way in a safe situation. "What is it, Rex?" he murmured, scanning the area. The man flinched and quickly turned away, pretending to leave. But Mark noticed something strange. His steps were uneven, like he couldn't decide whether to stay or go. Sarah pulled Emily close, unsure what was happening. "Is everything all right, officer?" she asked with concern. Mark nodded slightly, though his eyes never left the man. "Stay close to your daughter," he said calmly. "Just in case." The man was near the exit now, walking faster. But before leaving the park, he turned around and glanced once more at Emily. It was quick but cold, the kind of look that made Officer Mark's heart tighten. Rex growled again, his teeth barely visible but his body ready to move. Mark placed his hand gently on Rex's back to calm him down, but the dog wouldn't relax. His breathing was heavy, his gaze unbroken. Mark's mind raced. He had to decide whether to follow the man or stay to protect the people in the park. He decided to trust his dog. "Let's go, Rex," he said quietly. They followed slowly, blending with the flow of people leaving the park. The man didn't notice them at first. He kept glancing over his shoulder, as if he expected someone to call him back. Mark moved closer, one hand near his belt, the other steadying Rex. When they reached the corner, the man stopped again. Not to check his phone this time, but to peer around the trees toward the playground. That was enough for Mark to act. "Excuse me, sir," he said firmly, stepping closer. The man turned sharply, his face pale. "Do you have a child here?" Mark asked. The man's lips moved slowly. "No, officer. Just taking a walk." His voice was shaky and he avoided eye contact. Rex's bark exploded again, echoing through the trees. The man took a quick step back. Mark felt the tension rise. Something about this situation didn't fit. "Can I see some identification, please?" he asked. The man hesitated. That one small pause told Mark everything he needed to know. Rex began barking again, refusing to be silenced. People nearby started to whisper. The air that had felt warm and peaceful now carried a strange chill. Mark's heart was beating fast, but his voice stayed calm. "Sir, please keep your hands where I can see them," he ordered. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The park, once filled with laughter, was now silent. Even the birds had gone quiet. The man's eyes darted toward the playground once more, and then he turned and walked away quickly. Mark didn't chase him yet. He wanted to call for backup first. He bent down and stroked Rex's fur. "Good boy," he whispered. "You saw something I didn't you?" Rex looked up at him, his tail lowering but his eyes still alert. There was no doubt in Mark's mind that something dangerous had almost happened that morning. As they stood there, Sarah approached carefully with Emily holding her hand. "Is everything okay now?" she asked softly. Mark smiled faintly. "Yes, ma'am. You and your daughter can relax. Rex just did what he's trained to do and protect." Emily reached out to pet Rex, her little hand resting gently on his head. "You're a good dog," she said sweetly. Rex wagged his tail at last, his tension fading just a little. As the sun climbed higher, the park returned to its normal rhythm. Children laughed again and parents began talking once more, but Officer Mark couldn't shake the feeling that Rex had just saved someone, maybe even that little girl, from something terrible that hadn't yet happened. He looked down at his loyal dog and said quietly, "Whatever you saw, partner, I'm glad you were watching." Rex looked up with calm eyes, and for a moment Mark felt that deep, silent bond between them, a bond built on trust, instinct, and something beyond words. That peaceful morning wasn't ordinary anymore. It had changed something in both of them. Mark knew that day that when a police dog barks, it isn't just noise. Sometimes it's the sound of life being protected before danger even arrives. Rex would not calm down, no matter how many times Officer Mark told him to sit. The sound of his sharp barks echoed through the park, bouncing off the trees and making everyone stop what they were doing. Parents turned their heads in surprise, children clung to their mothers, and even joggers slowed to look back. It was strange because everyone knew Rex was a calm, well-trained police dog. He never barked without a good reason. Something was clearly wrong. Officer Mark kept a firm hold on the leash. "Easy, Rex, it's okay, boy," he said softly. But his dog's eyes stayed fixed on the same man near the park's edge. The man had started moving closer to the playground, his steps slow but steady. He tried to look normal, even smiled when he noticed people staring. "Hey, what's wrong with your dog?" he called out, pretending to laugh. Mark didn't answer. He had seen this kind of behavior before, someone trying too hard to look innocent. The man's fake smile didn't reach his eyes. He seemed nervous, like he wanted to leave but couldn't. Rex's barks became louder and more aggressive. He pulled hard on the leash, his body stiff, ears high, teeth slightly showing. The other parents began whispering among themselves. Some stepped away from the area, pulling their children along. Little Emily hid behind her mother, her eyes wide with fear. Sarah held her daughter close and looked toward Mark. "Officer, is everything okay?" she asked shakily. Mark nodded slowly, but his heart was racing. "Everything's under control," he said. "Just stay where you are." The man took a few steps back, raising his hand slightly as if to show he meant no harm. "Whoa, easy there, officer. I didn't do anything," he said with a nervous chuckle. But there was something odd about the way he kept glancing around as if checking for exits. Mark noticed his right hand was deep inside his jacket pocket. "Sir," Mark said firmly, "please take your hands out of your pockets." The man froze. His eyes darted toward the ground and he muttered something Mark couldn't hear. Rex started growling again, low and deep like thunder rumbling before a storm. It wasn't just a bark now, it was instinct screaming through him. "Sir," Mark repeated, taking a slow step forward. "Hands where I can see them now." The man hesitated, then quickly pulled his hand out, but he kept it half hidden under his jacket. That tiny movement made every muscle in Rex's body tighten. The people nearby gasped. Sarah shielded Emily's eyes. Rex lunged forward, barking furiously. Mark's grip on the leash tightened, but he didn't pull him back this time. He trusted his dog. There was something dangerous here, something he could feel in the air but couldn't yet see. The man looked around again, clearly panicking now. "I didn't do anything." "Control your dog," he shouted, taking a step back. But his voice cracked and his hand twitched toward his pocket again. "Don't move," Mark said sharply, his tone commanding now. The air grew heavy. Even the wind seemed to stop. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was Rex's barking and the faint rustle of leaves. The man finally pulled his hand out completely, and everyone saw something glint in the sunlight. It was small and metallic. Mark's eyes narrowed. He couldn't tell what it was from where he stood, but he knew it wasn't good. "Drop it," Mark shouted, stepping forward. The man's face went pale. His hand trembled. "It's nothing," he stammered, "just a—" Before he could finish, Rex barked again, louder than ever. The sound made the man flinch and drop the object. It hit the ground with a dull metallic sound. Mark saw it clearly now. It wasn't a phone or a keychain. It was a small folding knife. A ripple of shock spread through the onlookers. Sarah gasped and pulled Emily even closer. Some people started backing away, whispering and pointing. Mark acted quickly. He kicked the knife away with his boot and drew his weapon. "On the ground, now," he ordered. The man's breathing turned fast and shaky. He took a few steps backward, hands trembling in the air. "I wasn't going to do anything." "I swear," he cried out. But his eyes kept flicking toward the knife on the ground. He looked desperate, cornered. Rex continued to bark, keeping his body between the man and the children. Every time the man moved, Rex moved too, steady, focused, unafraid. Mark felt a wave of pride and gratitude for his partner, but he stayed cautious. "Lie down, face on the ground," Mark commanded again. The man didn't listen. Instead, he turned quickly, as if trying to run. That was all it took. Rex launched forward, his powerful legs pushing off the ground. In seconds, he closed the distance and leapt, tackling the man to the ground. Mark rushed over, grabbing the man's arm and securing him with a swift motion. The knife was far out of reach now. The people in the park stood frozen for a moment, too stunned to speak. Then one by one they began clapping. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Emily peeked from behind her mother, whispering softly, "Mommy, the dog saved me." Mark handcuffed the man and radioed for backup. "Suspect in custody," he said steadily. "Send a unit to the city park. Possible attempted abduction." The man didn't say much after that. He just lay there, his face pale and defeated. Rex sat beside Mark, calm again but still alert, his chest rising and falling with slow breaths. His job was done, but his eyes stayed locked on the man, watching every move. A few minutes later, 2 patrol cars arrived. Officers rushed in, taking control of the scene. They collected the knife and escorted the man into one of the cars. Mark gave a quick report to his superior and then finally turned to Rex. "Good job, partner," he said softly, kneeling down to pat his head. Rex licked his hand, tail wagging slightly as if he understood every word. Sarah walked over, still holding Emily close. "Officer, I don't even know what to say," she said, her voice trembling. "He was watching her, wasn't he?" Mark nodded slowly. "It looks that way. You and your daughter should go home for now. The area's secure." Emily looked at Rex with wide eyes. "He's a hero," she whispered. Mark smiled gently. "Yes, he is." As the police cars drove away, the tension in the park began to fade. Parents started to relax again, though their voices stayed quiet. They talked about how quickly things could change. One moment peace, the next danger. Mark stood still for a moment, letting it all sink in. He looked down at Rex, who was sitting proudly beside him, and thought about how close they had come to something tragic. If Rex hadn't barked when he did, if he had ignored his instincts, something terrible might have happened that morning. He reached into his pocket and pulled out Rex's favorite treat. "You earned it," he said with a smile. Rex took it happily, his tail wagging for the first time since the incident began. They continued their patrol slowly around the park once more, just to make sure everything was safe. People waved at them, some with tears in their eyes, some with grateful smiles. It wasn't just admiration they felt, it was relief. The parents realized that heroes didn't always carry guns or wear uniforms. Sometimes they had 4 legs and a heart that could sense danger before anyone else. By the time Officer Mark and Rex finished their round, the sun was setting behind the trees. The park was quieter now, but the feeling of gratitude lingered in the air. Sarah and Emily were gone, but Mark knew they'd never forget this day. He looked at Rex once more and said softly, "You saved a little girl today, buddy. You did good." Rex looked up, eyes calm, and gave a quiet bark as if to say, "That's what I'm here for." The world returned to normal. But for Officer Mark, that day became a reminder. Trust your partner. Trust the instincts that come from the heart. And never underestimate the courage of a loyal dog. The sound of sirens slowly faded as the police cars left the park. Officer Mark stood there with Rex beside him, still holding the leash but now with a lighter grip. The people had started to go back to their normal activities, but the mood of the park had completely changed. Mothers watched their children more closely, and people whispered quietly about what they had just witnessed. Mark could still see the shock on their faces, the fear of what might have happened if Rex hadn't barked at the right time. Rex sat calmly beside him now, breathing steady, eyes alert, but peaceful. He looked tired yet proud, like he knew he had done something important. Mark patted his back gently. "You did great, buddy," he said softly. "You saved that little girl." As the crowd began to thin out, Mark walked toward the bench near the playground where Sarah and Emily were still sitting. Sarah's eyes were red. She had clearly been crying. Emily was quiet now, hugging her mother tightly. The joy she had shown earlier while playing in the sand had vanished. "Hey there," Mark said kindly as he approached. "It's all over now. The man's in custody. You're both safe." Sarah nodded, but still looked shaken. "Officer, I can't stop thinking about it." He was standing so close to her. "I didn't even notice anything strange until your dog started barking." Her voice trembled. "If Rex hadn't done that," Mark shook his head gently. "Let's not think about what could have happened," he said. "You and your daughter are safe, and that's what matters." Emily looked up at Rex and gave a small smile. "Thank you, Mr. Rex," she whispered. She reached out her tiny hand to pet his fur. Rex licked her hand softly and wagged his tail just a little. That small movement made everyone smile for the first time since the chaos. After making sure everyone was okay, Mark guided Sarah and Emily toward their car. As they left, several people in the park came forward to thank him and Rex. One old man said, "That dog of yours, officer, he's got something special. He knew trouble before anyone else did." Mark nodded proudly. "He sure does. His instincts are sharper than most humans." When everyone had gone, Mark finally sat down on the same bench. The adrenaline that had kept him steady was slowly fading, and he felt the weight of what had just happened. He looked at Rex, who was lying on the ground now, resting his head on his paws. "You knew it all along, didn't you?" he said softly. Something about that man wasn't right. Rex blinked slowly as if to say yes. Mark thought about how quickly everything had changed. One moment, the park was full of laughter, and the next, it had turned into a scene of danger. That's how life often worked for police officers. Calm could shift to chaos in seconds. But today, it wasn't just training or quick thinking that saved someone. It was trust. Trust in a dog's instincts. Later that afternoon, Mark drove back to the police station with Rex sitting proudly in the back seat. The chief was waiting outside, having already heard about the arrest. "Good work, Mark," he said, clapping him on the shoulder. "And excellent work by Rex. That man was wanted in 3 nearby cities. You two stopped something serious today." Mark's eyes widened. "Wanted?" "Yes," the chief replied, pulling out a small folder. "His name is Trevor Mills. He's been under investigation for several weeks. We had reports of him hanging around schools and parks. We were just waiting for a break." Mark felt a chill go through him. "So he was planning something?" "It looks that way," the chief said. "But thanks to Rex, he's off the streets now." Mark looked back at Rex, who was wagging his tail happily at the sight of familiar officers. "You hear that, buddy?" he said with a smile. "You caught a wanted man." Everyone in the station gathered around to praise Rex. Officers offered him treats, and some patted his head with admiration. "Good boy, Rex," one of them said. "You're a real hero." Rex didn't understand the words, but he could feel the warmth and pride in the voices around him. He wagged his tail faster, clearly enjoying the attention. Later that evening, after finishing all the paperwork and reports, Mark and Rex finally returned home. The house was quiet, warm, and peaceful. Mark changed into casual clothes, poured himself a cup of coffee, and then sat down beside Rex, who was lying on the rug near the sofa. "You did something special today, partner," Mark said softly, rubbing Rex's neck. "You didn't just protect the people in the park. You protected that little girl's whole future." Rex turned his head slightly and let out a small sigh, the kind dogs give when they're relaxed but still alert. As the night grew darker, Mark couldn't help but replay the scene in his head, Rex barking, the man's nervous look the moment the knife dropped to the ground. Every detail reminded him how close they had come to disaster. He walked over to the window and looked out at the quiet street. The world outside looked peaceful again, but he knew how easily that peace could break. He took a deep breath, feeling grateful. The next morning, news had already spread across the city. The local newspaper had printed a photo of Rex sitting proudly beside Mark, both of them near the police car. The headline read, "Police dog foils attack saves little girl at City Park." When Mark reached the station, people from nearby neighborhoods had already gathered outside. They brought flowers, cards, and small gifts for Rex. Some children drew pictures of him with crayons, showing him as a superhero dog with a badge on his chest. One woman said, "That dog saved every parent's heart yesterday. Please tell him we're thankful." Mark smiled and said, "I think he already knows." Sarah and Emily came too. Emily held a small red ribbon in her hands. "This is for Rex," she said shyly. "To say thank you." Mark bent down and tied the ribbon gently around Rex's collar. "He'll wear it proudly," he said. Emily patted Rex's head again. "He's my favorite hero," she whispered before leaving with her mother. That small moment touched Mark deeply. He knew that for Emily this wasn't just a scary memory. It was also a lesson in courage and kindness. Later in the day, reporters came to interview Mark. One of them asked, "Officer, how did you know something was wrong?" Mark smiled and looked at Rex. "I didn't," he said honestly. "But Rex did. He sensed danger before any of us saw it. Sometimes you just have to trust the instincts of those who can feel what we can't." The video of the park incident soon went viral. Security cameras had caught the moment Rex barked, the man's nervous behavior, and how fast the situation changed. People across the city shared it online with messages of gratitude and admiration. "Heroes come in all shapes and sizes," one comment read. "Some even have paws." That night, as Mark got ready to head home again, the chief stopped him at the door. "You know," he said, "the mayor wants to recognize Rex next week. There's going to be a small ceremony." Mark smiled, feeling proud. "He deserves it, sir." "He really does," the chief chuckled. "Just make sure he doesn't steal the whole show." Mark laughed too. "With Rex? That's impossible." When they got home, Mark filled Rex's food bowl and sat on the floor beside him. "You know, buddy, everyone's calling you a hero," he said, scratching behind his ears. "But to me, you've always been one." Rex finished his food and placed his head on Mark's lap, his eyes calm and full of trust. In that quiet moment, Mark realized something important. Bravery wasn't about medals or ceremonies. It was about doing the right thing when it mattered most, even if no one was watching. Outside, the night breeze was gentle, and the world seemed peaceful again. But Mark knew that peace was only possible because of heroes like Rex, silent, loyal, and ready to protect at any cost. He leaned back on the couch and smiled. "Good night, partner," he whispered. Rex's tail thumped once on the floor before he drifted off to sleep, dreaming of open fields and sunny mornings. For the city, Rex was now a symbol of courage. For Mark, he was something even more, a reminder that sometimes the greatest acts of bravery come from those who can't even speak a single word. A few days passed after the park incident, but people in the town were still talking about it. Newspapers, TV channels, and even social media were filled with stories about Officer Mark and his loyal police dog, Rex. Everywhere Mark went, people stopped him to say thank you. But for Mark, the real credit belonged to Rex. He was the one who had sensed danger before anyone else had seen it. He was the one who protected that little girl without hesitation. On the third morning after the event, Mark was sitting at his desk at the police station, going through the final reports. He was tired but proud. Rex was lying quietly near his chair, resting his head on his paws. A few other officers passed by and couldn't help but smile. "There's the hero," one of them said. "You deserve another steak, buddy." Rex wagged his tail slightly, his eyes half closed but alert, as if he understood the praise. While Mark was finishing the paperwork, the chief of police walked into the room. He had a serious expression but a friendly tone. "Mark, we just got the full investigation report about that man, Trevor Mills," he said. "You'll want to hear this." Mark stood up, his attention sharp. "What did they find?" The chief placed a file on the desk and opened it. "Turns out that man wasn't just suspicious, he was dangerous. He's connected to multiple cases. He's been moving from city to city for months, watching parks and schools. We think he was looking for victims, and when he came to our park that day, he might have been planning to approach the little girl Emily." Mark felt his stomach tighten. He looked down at Rex, who had lifted his head, as if he could feel the tension in the air. "So Rex stopped him just in time," Mark said quietly. "That's right," the chief replied. "Your dog saved a child's life, maybe even more than one." Mark didn't say anything for a while. He just reached down and placed his hand gently on Rex's head. "Good boy," he whispered. Rex leaned into his touch, his tail moving softly. Later that day, Mark was asked to visit City Hall. When he arrived, he was surprised to find reporters waiting outside and a group of city officials inside the main hall. The mayor shook his hand warmly. "Officer Mark," he said, "on behalf of the city, we want to thank you and your dog for what you did. You didn't just protect one family. You reminded all of us how important courage and instinct can be." The mayor turned to Rex, who was sitting proudly beside Mark, his ears perked up. "And you, Rex," the mayor said with a smile, "you're the best officer in town." Everyone laughed softly and cameras flashed as the mayor placed a shiny medal around Rex's collar. It wasn't made of gold or silver, but it meant everything. People clapped and Mark couldn't help but feel emotional. He wasn't the kind of man who liked attention, but this moment wasn't about him, it was about Rex, his loyal partner who had done what no human could have done that day. After the ceremony, reporters surrounded him asking questions. "How did you know something was wrong?" one asked. "I didn't," Mark replied honestly. Rex did. "Sometimes you just have to trust the instincts of those who've been by your side through everything." He saw danger before I even noticed it. A young reporter knelt down in front of Rex, smiling. "Can I take his picture?" she asked. Mark nodded and Rex sat perfectly still, looking right at the camera, calm and noble. That photo would later appear in newspapers across the country with the caption, "Rex the police dog who listened to his heart." After the ceremony, Mark drove Rex back to the station. On the way, the radio played the news report about them. "Local police dog Rex and his handler, Officer Mark Davis, stopped a dangerous criminal earlier this week. Authorities say their quick action likely saved lives." Mark smiled as he listened. Rex's head was sticking out the window, his ears flapping in the wind. It was a beautiful afternoon, and for once Mark felt peace. When they reached the station, one of the officers ran out to greet them. "Mark, you have to see this," he said, holding out his phone. On the screen was a video someone had taken at the park that day. The moment Rex barked, the man froze, and then Mark moved in. The video had millions of views online. Comments flooded the post. "What an amazing dog. He's a true hero. Give that dog a medal." Mark chuckled. "Looks like you're famous, partner," he said, scratching Rex's neck. Rex barked softly in reply, as if he already knew. Later that evening, Mark drove to the park again. He didn't plan to stay long. He just wanted to see the place where everything happened. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and gold. The playground was full of life again. Kids were running, laughing, and their parents were smiling. The fear that had hung over the park was finally gone. As Mark walked with Rex, a few people recognized them. "That's them!" someone whispered. A group of children ran up, their faces full of excitement. "Can we pet him?" they asked. Mark smiled. "Of course. Just be gentle." Rex stood still as the children surrounded him, touching his fur and giggling. He wagged his tail, happy and calm. One little boy asked, "Is he a superhero dog?" Mark laughed softly. "He's better than that. He's a real-life hero." Just then, Sarah and Emily appeared from across the park. Emily was holding a small bag in her hands. She ran up to Mark and said shyly, "Officer Mark, I made something for Rex. She pulled out a handmade collar charm shaped like a tiny paw print with the word "Thank you" written in bright letters. Mark smiled warmly. That's beautiful, Emily. I'm sure Rex will love it. He attached the charm to Rex's collar right beside his medal. Emily giggled and hugged Rex tightly. You're my favorite dog, she whispered. As they stood there, Sarah looked at Mark and said, I'll never forget what you and Rex did. I didn't know that kind of bravery still existed in the world. Mark shook his head humbly. It's not bravery, ma'am. It's just what we do. And Rex here, he just did what his heart told him to do. The evening breeze brushed through the trees as the park lights began to glow. The laughter of children filled the air once more, and Mark felt a deep sense of calm. When they got home that night, Rex went straight to his favorite spot on the living room rug and lay down with a tired sigh. Mark sat beside him, leaning against the couch. He looked at the medal around Rex's neck and smiled. You know, buddy, he said softly, that little girl will grow up telling her kids about you one day. Rex gave a low, happy sound, half a bark and half a sigh. Mark turned off the lights and looked out the window. The stars were shining brightly in the clear sky. You're not just a police dog, he whispered. You're my best friend. The next morning, the police department released a public statement honoring Rex's service. They shared his picture with the words, For bravery, loyalty, and the protection of innocent lives, thank you, Rex. Messages from people across the country poured in. Some offered to send toys or treats. Others shared stories of their own dogs who had protected them in small but meaningful ways. Mark read many of those messages, smiling at how much one act of courage could inspire so many hearts. He realized that the story of that day wasn't just about stopping one bad man. It was about faith. Faith in the bond between a human and his dog. Faith in instinct and faith in doing what's right, no matter what. That night before heading to bed, Mark looked at Rex sleeping peacefully and whispered, You changed lives, partner. You really did. Rex didn't open his eyes, but his tail moved gently on the floor, just once as if to say, I know. And for Officer Mark, that was enough. A week had passed since the park incident, but people in the city still couldn't stop talking about Rex, the brave police dog who had saved a little girl. Every newspaper, every local channel, and even schools were sharing his story. Children drew pictures of him. Teachers used his story as an example of courage, and parents felt safer knowing heroes like Rex and Officer Mark were protecting their city. For Mark, life slowly returned to normal, or at least as normal as it could be after something like that. But things had changed. Every time he walked with Rex, people stopped him to shake his hand or pet the dog. Some children would run up and shout, That's the hero dog, and Rex, humble as always, would simply wag his tail and look up at Mark as if to say, Why are they making such a fuss? I just did my job. One bright morning, Mark received a call from the police chief. The mayor wants to hold a community event this weekend, the chief said. They're planning to honor Rex officially. It's going to be at the park, the same place where everything happened. You'll both be there, right? Mark smiled. Of course, sir. We wouldn't miss it. The following Saturday, the park was decorated with balloons and banners. A large crowd had gathered. Families, police officers, local news reporters, and even children holding handmade signs that read, Thank you, Rex. The stage was set near the playground, and in the front row sat Sarah and Emily, both looking happy and calm. Emily had a small gift box on her lap and a bright smile that showed pure gratitude. Mark walked up to the stage with Rex by his side. The crowd cheered as soon as they saw them. Some people even stood up, clapping loudly. Rex's ears twitched at the noise, but he stayed calm, walking proudly next to his partner. Mark bent down and whispered, You did this, buddy. Enjoy your moment. When the mayor took the microphone, his voice carried across the park. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, today we're not just celebrating a brave dog. We're celebrating loyalty, instinct, and the unspoken bond between a man and his partner. He looked down at Rex and smiled. When danger appeared in this park, it wasn't an alarm or a weapon that saved a child. It was a heartbeat, a bark, and courage. Everyone clapped again. Some people had tears in their eyes. The mayor turned to Mark. Officer Mark, would you like to say a few words? Mark stepped forward, adjusting the microphone slightly. He wasn't used to giving speeches, but today felt special. Thank you, he said, his voice steady but warm. That day in the park could have ended very differently. But Rex here, he didn't wait for me to give an order. He trusted his instincts. He saw danger when none of us did. And because of that, a little girl went home safely to her mother. He paused for a moment and looked around the park. This job isn't always easy. Sometimes it's quiet and sometimes it's frightening. But every officer knows that if they're lucky, they'll have a partner like Rex, someone who never doubts, never hesitates, and never gives up. There was silence for a second. Then another wave of applause filled the air. The mayor smiled and said, "Officer Mark, Rex, on behalf of the city, we thank you both." He held up a small framed certificate and a gold medal attached to a blue ribbon. For bravery, loyalty, and dedication to duty, this medal is awarded to Rex, the hero of our city. Mark knelt down as the mayor gently placed the medal around Rex's neck. Cameras flashed and people cheered. But Rex didn't move or bark. He just looked up at Mark with calm eyes as if to say, "We did it together." Then Emily stood up from her seat and ran toward the stage, clutching her little gift box. The mayor nodded for her to come forward. She smiled shyly as she handed the box to Mark. "This is for Rex," she said softly. Mark opened it carefully. Inside was a shiny silver dog tag with the words engraved, "My hero, Rex." Mark's throat tightened. He looked down at Emily and said, "He'll wear this proudly." Emily reached out to hug Rex and he stood perfectly still, lowering his head gently so she could wrap her tiny arms around his neck. The crowd went silent, watching the pure moment between a child and her protector. Many people wiped their eyes. After the event ended, people lined up to take photos with Rex. Children offered him treats, and officers from nearby towns came to meet the dog who had become famous overnight. Mark stayed close, making sure Rex didn't get overwhelmed, but he could tell his partner was enjoying the attention. As the sun began to set, the crowd slowly started to leave. The balloons danced in the wind and laughter faded into the soft sounds of the evening. Sarah and Emily came to say goodbye. "We'll never forget what you did," Sarah said with a smile. "Emily sleeps peacefully every night now. She still talks about Rex before bed." Mark smiled warmly. "That's all the thanks we need," he said. "Just keep smiling, both of you." Emily waved and shouted, "Bye, Rex," as she walked away with her mother. Rex barked once as if saying goodbye too. When the park finally emptied, Mark and Rex sat on the same bench where they had been the morning everything began. The place felt different now, calm, peaceful, safe. The evening breeze carried the smell of grass and distant laughter from another part of the park. Mark leaned back and looked at the medal glimmering around Rex's neck. "You know, buddy," he said softly, "this park will always be your place now. You turned it from a place of danger into a place of safety." Rex looked up at him, eyes bright and warm. He wagged his tail lightly, resting his head on Mark's knee. Mark stroked his fur slowly, feeling that familiar bond that didn't need words. He thought about how everything had started. Just an ordinary morning walk. A little girl playing, a stranger who didn't belong, and a bark that changed everything. That bark had not only saved a life, but had also reminded everyone of the power of trust and instinct. As they sat there, a few children nearby were still playing. One of them pointed at Rex and whispered, "That's the dog from the news." Another replied, "He's the one who saved the girl." Mark smiled. It was moments like these that reminded him that heroism wasn't about fame or medals. It was about doing the right thing when it mattered most, even if nobody ever saw it. Later that night, after dinner, Mark and Rex sat quietly in their small living room. The television was playing a local news segment about the event earlier that day. The reporter's voice said, "When Officer Mark's police dog, Rex, sensed danger at the park, he didn't wait for a command. He acted, and because of that, a life was saved. Sometimes heroes don't wear uniforms. Sometimes they have fur and a loyal heart." Mark smiled and looked at Rex, who was lying on his back now, paws in the air, completely relaxed. "They're talking about you again," he said, chuckling. Rex gave a small wag of his tail without even opening his eyes. Mark leaned back on the couch and stared at the framed certificate and medal on the shelf. But then he realized something. Those things didn't make Rex special. What made him special was the way he cared without question, the way he trusted without doubt, and the way he acted without fear. Outside, the stars shone brightly, and the world felt peaceful again. Mark turned off the television, stood up, and walked to the window. The city lights glowed softly, and somewhere in the distance a child's laughter echoed, free, joyful, and safe. He turned back to Rex and said, "You did that, buddy. You made the world a little safer." Rex's eyes opened slowly. He looked at Mark for a moment, then closed them again, falling back into a deep, calm sleep. Mark smiled, turned off the lights, and sat beside him on the floor. "Good night, partner," he whispered. "Sleep well, hero." And as the night wrapped around them, Officer Mark knew one thing for sure. The world would always remember the brave dog who barked at the right time. The one who saved a child and taught an entire city that sometimes true heroes walk on four paws.